Hi, my name is Sirar Hodobash. I made a shot with the dragon lighting my cigarette. It was mentored by Peter Kelly, and he gave me super useful comments. I really enjoyed his class, so thanks Peter, you rock. If you're interested how I made the shot, please join me in this little walkthrough. Maybe it will inspire you in your future animations. Before we move on, let me show you the final shot. I was inspired by the lecture of Alison Sanders, in which there is a CG cat interacting with a live-action character. Right in the moment I saw the shot, I thought, I want to do that. On the other side, I wanted to animate the dragon, and then bang! The idea just popped into my mind, and I threw away everything I did before and started looking for references on the internet. I think it is very important in this kind of shots to make sure the size and the behavior of the creature is well defined. It is very hard to find exact reference if you are working with imaginary creatures, so I had to put together the behavior from pieces of different references. This shot, for example, is one of my key references. I use these guys to imagine how my dragon would behave. Look how the pigeon lands on one of her arms and flies to the other. I really like that movement, so that became an essential part of my animation. There is another very important behavior I've learned from these references. How the birds move on an unstable ground, like on another living creature's body. They usually keep their wings open to keep the balance, and if anything happens, they can fly immediately away. This footage is a nice one for landing. I love how the tail swings. Although it is not driven by bone, it amplifies the motion of the tailbone, so it is a good start when I animate the tail. Also, you can see how the wing flap angle changes as the bird slows down and prepares landing. There is one more behavior I wanted to show in my animation. As you see, this parrot is using its beak as an arm, and I wanted to include that because it is funny that my dragon is not using its wings to climb around, but bites the cloth and stabilizes itself while it steps forward. When I was looking for reference, I really liked this sequence. The shot was animated by Balázs Mészáros. I love the wing flexibility, and I wanted to incorporate that in my dragon. For the plate shooting, I used the Quiet Pioneer approach. I had an opportunity to use the Perception Neuron motion capture system, which is kind of motion capture suite, so I could capture the plate footage together with the mocap. My goal with that was to spend less time on the match move, and if it's precise enough, I can use it for masking, constraining, and different areas later on. Since I'm not good in Maya, I had to use 3ds Max Biped for processing the mocap data. As Biped is only a rig, it has no mesh, so I downloaded a free character model from the internet. I just googled up free human model and downloaded the first I liked. I just used the basic skinning with some tweaks on the shoulder to connect it with the skeleton. When I selected the correct part of the footage, synced it with the mocap, and just eyeballed the camera. Unfortunately, I noticed that the mocap was so imprecise, I was pretty sure I will not be able to use it later for masking, and also I will need lots of extra work making the contact really well. I used FBX format to transfer the scene from 3ds Max to Maya, and as usually the rigs are quite sensitive on scaling, I scaled the set to the dragon instead of the dragon to the set. In the blocking phase, it was very important to make sure the body and the wing flaps has the right timing. I used the spline keys on the overall process, and the live action character was a really good help, really good starting point in the timing, because it shows where the creature should be at the specific moment. I used the straight technique between the storytelling points. For planting the feet, I used locators and constraints. I parented the locators to the bones of the mocap character, and I constrained the feet on the right keyframe to the locator, set to key, and removed the constraint so it kept the transformation with the body. At this point, I didn't care much of the tail, and you can see some weird in-betweens. And also, I didn't have much time to work on the last part after the fire breathing. In the refining phase, I wanted to finalize the body and the tail movement, or at least I wanted to make sure they are in good shape. I wanted to work more on the foot contacts, and I wanted to hit the notes, like to stretch the legs more before the first landing, work on the mouth, grabbing the arm, make sure it's climbing a bit lower on my shoulder, and get there a little earlier so we can see a profile view while it's breathing fire. The workflow was to select one move, about 30-50 frames, just work on the segment, make a playblast, write notes to myself, and hit those notes. Playblast again, write notes again, hit the notes again, until I accept that part. It can be done in few minutes or can take several iterations and can require some long hours. It's very disappointing after a half day that I'm just working on the same tiny segment forever and it's just not coming along. But I didn't give up. I wanted to see something good. But it's really hard sometimes to keep doing that for hours.
It's still not working!
But finally, when it starts to look good, it is precious. All those hours immediately gets a value. So let's see the refined animation. In this phase, first of all, I took care of the notes. I had to revise that mouth grabbing part because nobody got the idea, and even when my heart was broken, I had to say goodbye to that move. I had to work on the end of the animation, so I focused on the segment. I looked up some references on the internet, and I found this one. I wanted my dragon to close its wings like this little eagle does. I think it's okay if someone keeps looking for references, especially if there are some changes. I had to make sure the fire breath is more noticeable, so I wanted to prepare it in the animation, and I gave it a little anticipation. I also had to tone down the head overlap on the last landing. Other than the notes, I had to make sure the foot contacts are final now. For that, I used a nice little camera tool called 2D Pen Zoom. With that, I could easily zoom in and see more details for the specific part of the view. I also wanted to add some temporary fire effects, and I started the masking. I will talk about them later. Unfortunately, those tasks took so much time, I couldn't really touch the wings so far. But now, let's see how the polishing turned out. As you could see, the wings are still in blocking phase, so I polished them, and I worked on the tail in the second half of the shot. Now, as I have the final animation, I can work on the other tasks. Masking. Yeah, that's a biggie. In this pass, I wanted to remove the dragon's parts which are behind the visual obstacles like the actor's body. I tried several different ways, like hand painting the mask frame by frame, or writing a tool for that in 3ds Max, but Sony Vegas turned out to be the fastest solution. In order to make sure I can start masking, I needed to render the dragon only on a separate render pass, and I blended it with the background in Vegas. It needs a good amount of time and lots of precision. It was a little boring, but I could do it without a brain. You know, after work, at midnight, it's kinda relaxing. Here's the shot after masking. For the fire breath effect, I used the 3ds Max FumeFX plugin. And since I haven't used it for years, I had to watch a tutorial on YouTube, and you can find a lot. And I followed the steps of the tutorial, and that became the base of my specific effect. To make sure the dragon and the effect are the same screen position, I exported the camera and a little plane as an emitter, which was constrained to the head of the dragon. First I tried a particle-based emitter, like a flamethrower, but the comments on that made me to switch to an object-based emitting mode because the visual scale of the FX was too big, and I wanted to make sure that the FX looks something like a larger or a smaller scale torch. I also needed to set up the rendering to make sure it looks fire. I added some smoke to make it look more lifelike. At the end, I also needed to mask the fire because I wanted to make sure it's visually clear that it comes from the mouth, from the inside of the mouth, not next to it. For the rendering, I used my Manta Ray with a little bit of 3ds Max. I replaced the dragon's original Lambert shader to Blinn, so I had an option for the specular channel. For the lighting, I used image-based lighting. I took 6 pictures from different angles of the location, and I put the pictures on the corresponding size of a box in 3ds Max, and I started to smooth the box so it became a sphere. I put the camera in the middle and rendered a 360 spherical image. I used that in the Manta Ray, and since the image was not HDR, I created an additional light. That was my main light with a portal light shader. Down in the notes you will find the link to a tutorial I used creating the lighting. I had to make sure that there is motion blur and its magnitude is comparable to the motion blur in the live action footage. The context shadow makes the CG creature's existence in the real world more believable. That's why I wanted to add that feature. I used the motion capture character with a white color and with the same lighting. I rendered an image sequence in a different path, and in the compositing I processed it. Unfortunately, the shot was done in front of a reflecting surface, so I had to add the dragon's mirror image as a little detail. To save my computer from dying while computing all the reflections from a surface, I created a camera on the other side of the dragon, and I rendered a quick sequence, and I just positioned it correctly during the compositing. I also needed to mask the mirror dragon separately. I used render passes to make sure I can adjust some parameters later, like the amount of specular. So now I have everything in different sequences. For compositing, I use Sony Vegas. It's a linear editor, so I have layers over layers like in Photoshop. Let's talk about them one by one. On the lower layer, there is the rendered context shadow, as you can see here, and for masking that, I used the original footage and I used a difference composition mode with a still image of the background without the live action character. I made iterations of that, so at the end I had a black and white mask which showed only the moving areas of the image, the actor. It is the mask for the shadow, although it's not super precise. Since I didn't want to use bleach black shadows, I created as a shadow, I created a darker version of the original footage, and I used the shadow mask to blend them together. Above that comes the reflection of the dragon. I had to mask that in a separate file because there are obstacles like those ornaments on the window which are not reflecting, and there is the mirror image of the live action character which blocks seeing the reflection of the dragon. I used automatic masking for the ornament and frame by frame masking for the live action character. After that I needed to separate the mirror image to two different parts, lighter and darker. For the darker, I just darkened the mirror image, because if you see here, the parts which is in the shadow are darker than the reflection of the background. The other, I emphasized the light parts and used additive compositing mode. Now comes the dragon itself. I blended the diffuse and the specular with the background in a separate sequence. The render looks a little different than the footage, so I needed to compensate the difference by changing the levels of the render sequence, setting the darkest and lightest value to be similar to the live action footage. And then comes the fire. I modified the timing a little bit, and on the different layer comes the smoke effect. Then above everything there is the cigarette ash, for which I used a YouTube video positioned and scaled to the correct place. Yay! I have the compositing done. Let's take a look on the breakdown. To put the cherry on the top of the cake, I wanted to add some camera shake. I was cheating a little bit here, because from another shot I already had camera shake recorded, so I just tweaked it in 3ds Max and put a plane with the sequence on it in front of the camera, and I just rendered it. And done! I know I didn't always use the latest solutions, but I hope you got some insight into the challenges and the pipeline of a complex shot. Thanks for watching. Cheers!